I've come to a really cool place filled with lots of different historic buildings from the past. Buildings that were once in danger of being demolished and lost forever have been picked up and moved here and decorated to look as they would have done many years ago. This is Chiltern Open Air Museum, just north of London. I'm so excited to explore, I barely know where to begin. As well as the 18th century house you just saw, I also find a Victorian tin chapel, an RAF World War II Nissan hut, a World War I Nissan hut, a 19th century blacksmith's forge, a 1940s prefab house, and finally an old country cottage. The perfect location, don't you think, to uncover the history behind my subject today, World War II evacuees. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, and Britain declared war on Germany 2 days later. Fearing bombs would soon be dropping on British cities, the government evacuated 1.5 million people to the safer countryside in just 3 days. Most of these evacuees were children. Now, I want to know how this evacuation process worked and what life was like for the children being evacuated. So, using my time-travelling pocket watch right here, I'm going to be turning the clocks back a whole 80 years to find out. So, that will be all the way back here on my pocket watch. Why don't you join me? Are you ready? Close your eyes, hold on tight, and imagine the past. Wow! That worked nicely. Well done. The year is 1946 and the war has recently come to an end. I'm here to meet Mrs. Turner, former evacuation volunteer and host mother, to see if she can answer my questions. Hello, Mrs. Turner.
Oh, hello there. You must be Lauren. You have impeccable timing. I've just popped the kettle on. Well, it was a huge logistical exercise, you see. It relied upon tens of thousands of volunteer helpers, and I was one of those helpers. In scenes repeated across the country, school groups were marched to the local train station. Sadly, for many of them, their mothers were unable to travel with them, so they had to wave them goodbye wearing identity labels and gas masks and carrying only a small case with a few measly possessions.
And what happened when they arrived in the countryside?
Well, if you follow me, I shall show you.
Mrs. Turner takes me to her local village hall. This was turned into a schoolroom shortly after the war started to accommodate the extra children in the village. This was the first place that children were taken to upon their arrival.
Yes, but for most of the children arriving, they were terribly excited. It was such an adventure, you see. Many of them had never visited the country before, let alone stayed away from home. Oh, here. Take these.
What's this for?
Well, most of the children had to spend their first night in here sleeping on the floor. Chop chop, look lively.
I can imagine the reality for the children really setting in at this point. The lights go out, you're sleeping on a cold, hard floor, you're a long way from home, away from your mum for the very first time. I bet it starts to feel quite scary. Right then, night night.
The following morning, it was the role of the billeting officer to allocate children to host families. and I was one of those billeting officers. I was also a host mother. I took in 2 children from London, aged 9 and 6.
And how did the billeting officers match up the children to the families?
That was a rather delicate process. The children would all stand in a line and wait to be picked. The only trouble is, some host parents wanted specific children. For example, some wanted boys to help them on the farms, or an older girl to help carry out domestic duties in the family home, or look after the younger children.
And I imagine it must have been really difficult if you were one of the last to be picked.
Well, yes, of course.
Next, Mrs. Turner takes me down to visit the village farm. On the way, she explains how many evacuees arriving from the cities had never even seen cows before. So, am I right in saying that there isn't enough farmland in Britain to provide food for the whole population?
No, you're absolutely right. The population has grown astronomically, which means the British government relied heavily on importing goods from abroad. But since war broke out, the Nazi government have been bombing our ships, bringing us our food supplies. So to prevent a shortage, the British government has introduced food, clothing and fuel rationing. Why don't we pop inside and I'll show you a ration book. This is a ration book. Everybody in Great Britain has been allocated one of these, and we have to register with our local shopkeeper.
Each time something is purchased, the shopkeeper marks the purchase off in the customer's book.
And on the table in front of you, you can see a grown-up's weekly allowance of food rations. We are given 2 ounces of cheese and butter, and tea of course, 4 ounces of bacon and ham, 3 pints of milk and 1 egg. But might I add that fruit and vegetables are not rationed, so you can eat as much of those as you can grow, and neither is offal.
Offal being all the offcuts of meat and organs that people don't normally want.
That's absolutely right.
Just the 1 egg?
Yes, so choose wisely when and how you eat it.
The fact that everyone was restricted to buying a certain amount created a sense of sharing and cooperation in Britain.
And children are also given extra milk. We are very aware of how we need to be healthy, therefore it makes for strong children.
What about sweets and chocolate?
There in the ration book, I'm afraid. 12 ounces to last 4 weeks. I have to keep mine hidden, or my lot would scoff the lot in one go. You see, even though the war ended a year ago, rationing is still very much in place.
In fact, it will be another 8 years of rationing for Mrs. Turner, as rationing didn't come to an end in Britain until 1954. So what about at Easter? Are there no chocolate eggs?
Well, actually, a lot of the local shops started selling carrots on sticks as an alternative.
Wow, very creative. I like it. And much healthier too. So, was rationing the only measure that the government brought in to help with the food supplies?
No, of course not. There was the Dig for Victory campaign too. Well, in the October of 1939, the government began urging people to make allotments in their garden. In fact, any spare space for that matter, be it a sports playing field, a golf course or parks. Heavens, even the moat at the Tower of London was transformed into an allotment.
And was the campaign successful?
Oh yes, very. The number of allotments doubled to 1.4 million by 1943.
Like rationing, the Dig for Victory campaign continued after the war, with the government changing the name to Dig for Plenty.
I'm rather proud of my allotment, actually. Before the war, I wasn't into gardening at all, but I've become rather green-fingered of late. Actually, whilst you're here, I could do with your help.
Oh, well, I'm not very good at gardening. I don't have a garden, actually. Mrs. Turner, I wonder if... Schools and many families all over the country kept what was known as Anderson shelters in their grounds and back gardens to protect them from bombs during air raids.
So, this here is our Anderson shelter.
So when the air raid siren rang, you all had to gather around here?
That's right. And like this one, many shelters were buried half beneath the ground with heaps of soil and earth on top to protect from bomb blasts. Would you like to go inside and take a look?
Yes, please. The government gave out Anderson shelters free to people who earned below £5 per week, and by September 1939, 1.5 million Anderson shelters have been put up in gardens. Okay, so my first thought is that I can't imagine it was too pleasant having to come out here in the middle of the night.
No, not at all. But we did keep a few things in here, like blankets, books and cards to help pass the time.
I've had a great time today, learning firsthand from Mrs. Turner what life was like for all those involved in the evacuation process. I can only imagine that mix of fear and excitement the children must have experienced. But I'm also going away today having learnt about all the positive concepts from those on the home front. Children from inner cities were exposed to the countryside and farm animals for the first time. And when necessary restrictions were put in place on food and clothes and rationing was brought in, our great-grandmothers were encouraged to work together with their neighbours to get out and grow their own food, and to think more carefully before throwing things away and creating waste. Yes, they were faced with changing and difficult times, but we can all learn from their community spirit, resourcefulness and mindfulness with which they faced them. Is that the time already? I'd better be getting back before it gets dark outside. Thanks for the tea and tour, Mrs. Turner.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Lauren.
Have you got your pocket watch at the ready? Ready to turn the clock forward this time, a whole 80 years. Close your eyes, hold on tight, and think of home.
Heavens! Where on earth did she go?